Good evening, comrades, allies, and friends. I want to welcome those of you who are in the office. And on Zoom, we have over 50 people, Zoom so far, to this very special forum sponsored by Workers' World Party with a focus on the world is bringing down the empire, forging global solidarity in the belly of the beast. Is that better? My name is Monica Moorhead. I'm a Workers' World Managing Editor, and I will be your chair this evening. We are so thrilled to have a panel of dynamic, respected revolutionaries representing important issues and struggles here and worldwide to share their assessment of the current global struggle against empire and our movement and how our movement can continue to get stronger and more united to reach the ultimate goal of ultimately defeating this decaying imperialist beast. Because those of us located in the global north cannot just depend on the heroic movements in the global south, from Iran to Lebanon to People's China, to carry on this battle alone. Our siblings in the global south need us just as much as we need them, because imperialist aggression, including war, white supremacy, occupation, and cutbacks, know no boundaries. And despite its weakened state, continues to be very dangerous and more violent, just like a wounded animal. And while we must continue to show anti-imperialist solidarity with the masses and their sovereign governments under siege, like in Iran, which now the US has continued its vicious war on that sovereign country, the attacks on Cuba, on Venezuela, and elsewhere, that right now they're on the front lines of the struggle, and of course, the heroic Palestinian resistance against the US-backed Zionist genocide. We are obligated from time to time to collectively look towards the future to, quote, imagine, just as John Lennon sang decades ago, how another world is possible, freed from the grip of oppressive class relations, poverty, and all forms of inequality. Our party wants to host future United Front type forums like this one, and encourage other groups to do so, to do the same, because no one organization can help play a strategic role to help our class to carry out this historic task on its own. Any differences our organizations may have must become consequential when it comes to the liberation of all humanity. So with this short orientation in mind, we will first hear from our panelists, and then we'll have a few short announcements, and then open up the floor for Q&A. And I'll give an orientation for the discussion after our last speaker. So I want to open up the panel discussion with Larry Holmes, who is the first secretary of Workers' World Party.
Pardon me, comrades, I'm currently suffering some back pains, but like everything else, they will pass. It's okay. It's so good to see you all and to be here with you this evening. Part of the motivation for the forum is the 250th anniversary of you know what, and many progressives and revolutionaries, certainly anti-imperialists, anti-racists, have seeing the 250th anniversary as an opportunity to expose white supremacy, history, racism, colonialism, imperialism, which is necessary, which I think gave us, excuse me, the liberty of looking forward and suggesting that the biggest development to note on the 250th anniversary is the decline of U.S. imperialism, which Iran's victory has sort of underscored. And it's also the decline of capitalism, which is entering a sort of a new phase of its end stage. There may be reasons for that, but what reason am I really thinking about? The U.S. imperialist, fading, crumbling empire is the center of world imperialism. And so if it's in decline, capitalism as a system is in decline as well. As some of you know, I wrote an article that's in Workers' Row newspaper, both the print paper and online. And I hope comrades get an opportunity to look at it. I hope that it will stimulate discussion, debate. Please scrutinize it critically. I believe it's important. It's an important contribution. And it's sort of how I view / we view the meaning of this anniversary. In the wake, we're not suggesting that the U.S. empire is over yet. It's very much exists and still very dangerous, like a dying beast, very violent, inclined to use terror everywhere. But in its place, there is what they are calling the development of a multipolar world. I consider that a transformative phrase. That's very true. And in the place of U.S. imperialist hegemony, there is the rise of the global South, and of course, China. And together, all of this means, and it's something that we need to appreciate, and it's a big part of the reason why I wrote what I did. This is the biggest world transformation. Some people say in 100 years. I would go further in saying the history of the capitalist system that the world is undergoing. And it's a moment for revolutionaries to stop. A lot of times revolutionaries are so busy defending their communities, fighting fascism, fighting for immigrants, except fighting imperialism, that unlike some people we sometimes call armchair revolutionaries, seem to have time to do that, maybe because they're not doing other stuff. I don't know. They think the big thoughts about the world, what direction that we're going. Well, now everybody's thinking that. What comes next now? Where is the world going? And as revolutionaries, we're obliged to think that too. We have to have an answer. When someone asks us, what do you revolutionaries think now about where things are going? Obviously, things are changing. So have you discussed it either, alone or collectively? And I think we're obliged to have an answer. And the answer that we're suggesting is there has to be a revival of the struggle for global socialist revolution. Some may say, it's a reasonable thought that, that's a nice idea, but it's premature, and the working class is not ready for it. Political conditions are not ready for it. We don't have the movement for that. And I think that's all reasonable. And that's one of the reasons to have reservations. But there's another reason that's equally, if not more important for us, I think, as revolutionaries, that those of us who consider ourselves revolutionaries and internationalists. And that's that over a period of time, setbacks have had an effect on revolutionary ideology. It's not to say that we're not socialists anymore and that, everybody may, formulate it differently, but, somehow we're projecting a socialist future. It's that the orientation of world socialist revolution is weaker now. Not because of any individual or any organization, not really. It's because of the setbacks over a long, long period of time. And it's a good time to take note of that and figure out is that satisfactory? What are we going to do about it? After the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks and others formed a communist international, called the Comintern. And their hope, it was very ambitious, was to help organize world revolution. We can have a class on that and write on that, but we don't have that now for all sorts of reasons, history, conditions, etc. That doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean that we don't have the same goals and orientation. It just means that there's a lot to do in order to get to the point where we've got that. Now, just talking about socialism, I think we should take note of the fact that the Democratic Socialists of America have run campaigns, election campaigns in New York and elsewhere, and they've had victories. And we have a lot of problems with the Democratic Socialists of America. And they're important. And, we're going to end up in a struggle with them, basically with a struggle with social democracy that will, the broad banner of that will be revolution versus reform. No, you can't substitute the class struggle in organizing the masses with the electoral struggle. No, you can't take the Democratic Party away from the bourgeoisie. I'm afraid they're not going to let you do that. And no, you can't reform capitalism. On the other hand, it's important to note that people are voting for socialism. And it's not just a reflection of consciousness in New York or elsewhere. It's a reflection of what's going on all over the world, comrades. The masses want a future beyond capitalism. And we have to take that seriously and deal with it politically and strategically. Also, how we view the struggle, and I'm speaking to the choir in a way because our party and many of our allies, we know this. We can't merely view the struggle in local or national terms. It must be viewed as a world struggle. Of course it is. We know that. We've read our Marxist, Leninist theory, but all too often it's not seen that way because various forces in the working class movement or that influence the working class movement, either out of caution, fear, or pragmatism or strategy, and sometimes deliberately because they're for US imperialism, conceal that. So it's a political problem. It's a question of political consciousness. And what's important for us to do in this epoch is to say that it's no longer allowable for anyone who's in the struggle to conceal, to hide, to mask, or deny the global character of the struggle. The time for that was never, but even if it was for tactical reasons, I don't know, it's long past. It is impractical. It is politically futile. It's ahistorical to view the struggle as being only local and national. Of course, from the point of view of workers and communities, the struggle will always be local. The struggle for food, the struggle for clothes, the struggle for the things that people need, for reforms. We're not reformists, but we support the fight for whatever people need. We're just not for that as the solution to the problem of capitalism. You know, we know that, but now history, new world conditions demand that revolutionaries up their game, in a matter of speaking, and think in terms of the world struggle. And also to realize that the world struggle at present, and it's going to be that way for a while, is centered in the global south with the help on many levels of People's China. It is, and by the way, that's where 90% of the population is, the global south. And it's also at the centers of imperialism, too. That's why they're freaking out and trying to make countries like the US a white supremacist enclave, but they'll fail to do that. You know, fascism and repression notwithstanding. We have to be in solidarity with this struggle from the resistance in West Asia to the resistance in Africa, the Sahara, throughout Latin America, everywhere. We have to be with the resistance, even in the countries that are fighting, and they're not fighting for socialism, all of them. They're fighting to free themselves to some extent from US imperialist hegemony. They're fighting against the vestiges of colonialism and neo-colonialism. But we are with them, from the revolutionary resistance to those who are fighting colonialism. We stand with them. And we're not only in solidarity, we're not only opposed to imperialism, we are with them. We are an extension of their struggle. We are part of it. If they are the body, we are the arm. Maybe one day they will be the limbs and we will be the body, but that's not happening yet. So right now they're the body and we're the limbs. We're connected. We're not just marginal, and they depend on us. What will change that is sort of like the other shoe that needs to fall? Right now, China and the people, the rising up people of the global south, they're doing the heavy lifting. Let's be honest, you know. And the class struggle at the centers of imperialism is developing, but right now it's not the main thing that is pushing and defeating US imperialism or imperialism everywhere. What can change that? Well, the biggest thing, phenomena, event that can change that is something that's in the making, and that is the collapse of the capitalist system on a worldwide scale. There are many reasons why that I don't have the time to go into that, but you know, we can talk about that on so many levels. And the big question, comrades, is will that have an impact on the revolutionary development of the working class, on the class struggle, on unity, on the revival of revolutionary forces that can help it, that can provide revolutionary leadership? We believe that it can. We're not making predictions that we can't back up, but we understand or need to understand, I think, that this is what's missing in the world struggle. And so we prepare for it. As a matter of fact, we have to prepare for the outcome or the consequences of everything that we're discussing. That's a tall order, comrades. And there's a lot of things that go under that. And we shouldn't be overwhelmed. We have time if we're serious about it and if we want to move ahead. The question is that something that we want to do? Move ahead with all fellow thinkers and travelers everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. So now we're going to hear a recorded presentation by one of the founding members of the Friends of Socialist China, Carlos Martinez, who's based in London. So that's why he couldn't be on, because it's 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever. So he was gracious enough to make this presentation that we're going to play for you now. Carlos Martinez.
Comrades, thank you very much for inviting me. I've been asked to speak on the role of China in the global project of bringing down the empire. I want to start with a simple claim, which is that the single biggest factor in overcoming imperialism in the present historical epoch is the emergence of a multipolar world. And the single biggest factor in that process is the rise of People's China. So let me talk about what China's role actually is, how it's changed over the decades, and why it matters so much for everyone who wants to see a different world, a world of peace, equality, prosperity, friendship, and solidarity. On the small matter of war and peace. As you know, the United States has been at war for over 90% of its history. It maintains something like 800 overseas military bases in 80 countries, and it spends over $1 trillion a year on its armed forces. People's China, by contrast, hasn't fought a war in close to 5 decades. It's never seized a colony. It's never carried out a regime change operation. It's never imposed a unilateral sanctions regime. And it remains the only major nuclear power unambiguously committed to no first use of nuclear weapons. And that's not an accident of circumstance. It flows from a very long established orientation, one that China has articulated since the 1950s in the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence: sovereignty, non-aggression, non-interference, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. Respect for the United Nations Charter and international law isn't rhetoric China reaches for when it's convenient, it's the actual content of its foreign policy. Now, of course, history doesn't move in a straight line, and while the principles of China's foreign relations have been very consistent, the practical implementation of those principles has shifted over time. In the first decades of the People's Republic, China was pretty overt in its support for global anti-imperialism. Just a year after the revolution, 3 million Chinese soldiers went to Korea to help beat back a genocidal US war. Around 180,000 of them never came home. China gave material backing to liberation movements in Vietnam, Algeria, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and beyond. China was poor, it was blockaded, it was isolated, and yet it stood with the colonized world anyway. In the early 1970s, the door to the US opened, China regained its seat at the UN in 1971, and from the late 1970s, with reform and opening up, the whole national focus shifted to economic development. That meant, in Deng Xiaoping's phrase, hide your strength and bide your time, dialing down support for armed struggle abroad, keeping a low profile, cultivating good neighbors in order to build national strength. And some on the left have read that as a betrayal. I would argue it was a necessary foundation, and on that foundation, apart from anything else, China has lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty. It's turned itself into the world's only green energy superpower. It's built a modern industrial economy on the cutting edge of science and technology, and that in itself provides an important material basis for global anti-imperialism. And over roughly the last decade, China has again started to take up a leading role in world affairs. The Belt and Road Initiative, the vision of a community of shared future for humanity, the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative, and now the Global Governance Initiative. Together, these sketch an architecture for international relations that's built on common development, common security, and sovereign equality. And in that sense, I think you can see arguably a quite profound continuity between the anti-imperialism of the 1950s and the multipolarity of today. They look different, but they're two stages of a single project, adapted to very different conditions. Some people, of course, argue that multipolarity is simply the latest version of inter-imperialist rivalry, and that China is seeking to replace the US as the world's hegemon. But that's really a misunderstanding of what multipolarity is, and it ignores the substance of China's engagement with the world. Look, for example, at China's relations with Africa. At the China-Africa Forum in 2018, President Xi Jinping stated, "We respect Africa, love Africa, and support Africa. We follow a 5-no approach in our relations with Africa. No interference in African countries' pursuit of development paths that fit their national conditions. No interference in African countries' internal affairs. No imposition of our will on African countries. No attachment of political strings to assistance to Africa. And no seeking of selfish political gains in investment and financing cooperation with Africa." Wouldn't it be nice if the United States and Europe followed this sort of 5-no approach regarding Africa? And Xi Jinping's statement wasn't just words. China invests in Africa without conditions of austerity or privatization. It invests in infrastructure, in energy, in agriculture, in industry, in schools and hospitals. So China's actively helping Africa to break the chains of underdevelopment. That's why Fidel Castro called China the most promising hope and the best example for all third world countries. The most recent example of the contrast between China and the US's approach to international affairs is the criminal war in Iran. That war was, or is, in many ways, a sort of last throw of the dice for the project for a new American century. It's aimed not just at the last great pole of resistance in West Asia, but at China, at the Belt and Road, at the whole multipolar project. And it backfired spectacularly. The US burned through perhaps 30% of its Tomahawks and half of its THAAD interceptors, weapons that are actually stockpiled for a future confrontation with Beijing, and it suffered a humiliating defeat. And where the US brought bombs, China brought a very different kind of power. China condemned the war at every diplomatic forum, it kept buying Iranian oil, and openly told its firms to defy US secondary sanctions. Together with Russia, it vetoed a war-enabling Security Council resolution, having learned the lesson of Libya in 2011. And when a ceasefire was brokered by Pakistan, it was done with the backing of Beijing. The US did everything it could to break Iran, and China helped Iran to defend itself. Obviously, ultimately, China isn't going to save us. No country can do that. The struggle against imperialism and for socialism is a global one. But the Egyptian Marxist Samir Amin argued that a multipolar world provides the framework for the possible and necessary overcoming of capitalism. And that's the crucial point. By breaking the monopoly of the imperialist core over the periphery, multipolarity gives the countries of the global south room to breathe, room to follow their own development path, to defend themselves from imperialist aggression, to cooperate with each other on their own terms, and even to revisit the socialist experiments that some of them were forced to abandon. Meanwhile, China proves the empire's way is not the only way, that you can lift a fifth of humanity out of poverty without invading anyone. So the choice before every country now, and before all of us organizing here in the belly of the beast, is whether to cling to a dying empire or to join the rising majority of humanity building something better. I'll leave the last word to Hugo Chavez, who understood this as well as anyone. China is large, he said, but it's not an empire. China doesn't trample on anyone. It hasn't invaded anyone. It doesn't go around dropping bombs on anyone. Thank you.
Based in New York City against exploitation, capitalism, and state violence as part of a global struggle for liberation. Matthue?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, Palaver is a Marxist and Pan-African organization. We do a lot of organizing around housing and around different campaigns with Affordable for You, as well as other rallies and international solidarity movements. When it comes to international solidarity, I think it's very important when we look at history on the perspectives of pessimistic or optimistic views when it comes to this. So I think one of the biggest views is that the US is like this impenetrable force that is unbeatable and can't be weakened or defeated. And when you look through history, there is a lot of times where they have lost wars, guerrilla wars. Vietnam is the main one that everybody likes to talk about. But just in general, places where they weren't able to succeed in imposing their will. I think that a lot of people are not aware of these situations, which is to why there's a big pessimistic view, especially in the youth of America per se, but the youth in general, where you have a very negative outlook. And then the second part of that optimistic view is that a lot of revolutionaries and a lot of martyrs and a lot of people that we read, they all went to other countries when the time was right to help stir those revolutions and help gain intellect or help gain experience in them, whether it's France Fanon in Algeria, whether it is who else were we talking about today? Che Guevara from Argentina going to Cuba, helping Bolivia, going to Mozambique, things of that nature. There's always a individual that we look to that has gone to another place in global solidarity to help understand and actualize those people's sovereignty. That is the key when it comes to global solidarity or alliance and allegiance, is that in order for you to get any accomplishment in the revolution, and even if you look at past revolutions, whether it's the American Revolution with the help of the French, or a Haitian Revolution, the help of the Polish to an extent, you always have international solidarity in order to have a successful revolution. When building that, I think, and especially organizing in the belly of the beast, it is key and prime to do that so that you have a backing and an understanding of people that aren't necessarily in the same predicament as you. Because as we exist in the belly of the beast, we are too comfortable as people. In Sudan, in Congo, in Lebanon, besides the bombing in Iran, there is multiple, it's basically like slave trading in the modern era. And it's just for the capital, whether it's gold, whether it's cobalt, whatever you want to call it. There is people being driven in the most uncomfortable places. In America, we are super comfortable. There is no, some of the most poorest people don't have to go through what a person in Sudan and Northern Sudan has to run from the RSF every single day, or necessarily seeing half of their family get killed. We have terrible conditions, but we aren't to that point yet. And that is why we are able to be sedated and keep programmed and indoctrinated and to reform per se when it comes to the masses at first. But when you really need revolution, you have to get out of that uncomfortable stage. When you stick in that comfortability and understanding that, oh, I have this passport, I have this nationality, or I live here, you lose a lot of empathy and you lose a lot of the personality of being human and connected to this global struggle. The global struggle is the most important because, I mean, as we've all read with Marx, it can't happen unless it all happens together. If one capitalist country still exists, the project is not done. Nothing is done. Nothing is completed. So in order for that to be completed, you have to work as a across the board global allegiance. When it comes to modern day organizing, I think that a lot of us struggle with, especially I would say the young people, struggle with keeping an optimistic outlook towards revolution, which I think you should always have an optimistic outlook towards revolution. Otherwise, you'll never succeed. It's like kind of how they have willpower. When it comes to that and being a young organizer, you want to take baby steps to get to the larger steps. You want to get out, you want to organize, you want to do whatever you can, whatever you see, you just want to learn. As long as you're constantly learning, there will never be a time where it is necessarily a bad thing that you're doing. You can understand, you can learn, but organizing is really where you want to get your foot in the door, whether it's organizing a soup shop or a food run or a deli or whatever the case may be. As long as you're starting to organize and understand something and read and want to learn and want to get better, that is what I would say is like the key to the young people. that are trying to get into organizing. And then on the international stage, you always want to have that outreach to the international stage, because if you don't, you are stuck in this echo chamber of thoughts and fighting and indoctrination that you will never get out of, where we see a lot of people where when you do try and fight that war in the country that is your main oppressor or is your main oppressor, you then are usually martyred, killed, run out, incarcerated. We have plenty of incarcerated revolutionary fighters right now. I know the anti-ICE protesters just got life in 30 years. There's a lot of different situations like that where if you do try and fight against the imperial state inside of the state, in the belly of the beast, you will be made an example of. And I think that is a big fear of a lot of young organizers. That should not be the fear if you are organizing in a true mass way of trying to reach the masses, not just trying to be necessarily an opportunist or trying to get this done or trying to do. If you are working on the global project, you will then understand that there's no place that you can't go that you will not be safe. My prime example for that would be Asada. You get to go to Cuba, you flee to Cuba, are able to escape to Cuba, you're still very impactful on what is going on in America at the time, regardless, still to this day, even post Cuba, like past your death. I think that is important because there is this kind of idea that you're fighting for this sovereign land, especially as like Americans. You're fighting for this land. This land is the most important land. This land is your land, my land, whatever. That comes to a point where you have to leave in order to affect necessarily. You have to reach out and be in these global arenas in order to affect, because you can't do it alone. There's no such thing. There's no revolution that's ever been done alone by that sovereign state. It takes the sovereignty of the people, but those people have help from other people, like how we were just talking about the People's Republic of China, Venezuela, all these places, Cuba, and how Cuba helps Africa when Africa calls and Africa answers when Cuba calls. These things would not be possible without help and international solidarity. I just want to end on that. I think that we need to just organize more and always be open to learning. I think that's one thing that people can never stop doing. As long as you want to chase like new information, wanting to learn, you will always be successful in this life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, Comrade Rabab is a well-respected Palestinian professor who created the Arab and Muslim ethnicities and diasporas studies program, the first of its kind, and has been targeted by Zionists for destruction since its creation, even though she was invited by the San Francisco State University to start it and build it, as San Francisco State became more and more a corporate university. And there's Comrade Rabab, who wanted to be with us tonight, but couldn't. Hello, Rabab.
Hello, hi, Monica. Shall I start?
Yes, you can.
Okay, time me. First of all, good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me and for including me in this very important discussion. I'm going to focus on what does 250 years of the U.S. as a so-called nation state look and mean for the Palestinian, from a Palestinian perspective. But I first start by grounding my intervention with land acknowledgement that my campus, San Francisco State University, on the San Francisco Peninsula and North Bay, are located on the unceded stolen land of the indigenous people of the Ramaytush, Ohlone, and the coastal Miwok, who continue to live on their land, i.e. they're not of the past, and experience continued act of displacement. The students, faculty, and staff of our university benefit from this occupation. We have responsibility to connect this acknowledgement with an affirmation and action of our commitment to defeating the settler colonial project in the US and Israel, and as well as everywhere else, and to support land back for all displaced people. And I say this as a Palestinian who, indigenous Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, third world, feminist, and activist woman of color, who also has been affected by this. I also want to take a moment of silence to acknowledge and honor all the martyrs who have fallen in Iran, Lebanon, Gaza, the streets of Minneapolis, elsewhere in the United States, Congo, Sudan, Venezuela, South Africa, Puerto Rico, Kashmir, and everywhere around the world. We remember martyrs who have fallen long time ago and martyrs who have fallen not long ago. They, the martyrs, continue to struggle and have struggled for us to continue and fight. For my presentation, I wanted to say a few things. What's the context in which we are living today? Today, we are existing in over 1,000 days of Israeli genocide in Gaza. US is back to bombing Iran again, and Israel has not stopped bombing Lebanon. The United States is tightening its blockade against Cuba and trying to wreak havoc anywhere in the world. It's as if we are living in every single stage. The United States has been intervening in affairs of all people around the world. Meanwhile, what's happening here in this country is that more raids by ICE, more killing of people, more targeting specifically of young and people of color, in particular, indigenous people, indigenous communities, as well as poor people, denying people food, shelter, water, schools, even air, depriving people of life itself. Meanwhile, we see that Trump and company, and I'm not talking about only a particular number of people, I'm talking about the 1% that's actually increasingly becoming the 0.5% that are depriving, and they're getting richer and richer and controlling more of the world. In Palestine, there is not only over 1,000 days of genocide, there is a real genocide to eliminate the Palestinian people as the United States, let's say, a settler colonialism in this Western Hemisphere, not just in the United States, in Turtle Island, in North America, as well as in South America and the Caribbean, have started to genocide with the indigenous nations. This has been a continued plan by the Zionist movement since it started to eliminate the Palestinian people over 100 years ago. In order to realize the motto, a land without a people for people without a land, both sides of this equation are wrong, are not actually accurate. There was a place for people, Europeans, to live, European Jews to live, and there were people on this land, Palestinians. But Zionism has tried to erase and cut off every single aspect of Palestinian connection to their land, and continues to do so today by eliminating the children, to cut off this next generation of Palestinians, has continued to engage in reproductive genocide against births and mothers of Palestine, has actually started from way back when and now to eliminate even the trees that have been existing on Palestine and killing them one by now. Actually, a Zionist news website that a couple of weeks ago issued a study by an Israeli scholar, not a Palestinian, not a leftist Israeli scholar, not an anti-Zionist Israeli scholar, talking about what happened to when Israel in 1910 has started, Zionists at that time, tried to plant pines all over the lands that they were trying to grab. It wasn't yet Israel, it was Palestine, occupied Palestine. And now they have damaged and destroyed all the indigenous vegetation that was under them, either by covering the sun from them or by displanting them and taking over the land. They're aggressive, and they have taken over and have destroyed the environment of Palestine. There is more and more I can talk about, but we don't have time to do so. Am I being heard? Okay, I'm hearing sound in the background. In any case, this has been every single aspect to destroy anything that's called Palestine. And as time went on and on, Palestinians rose again and again, as indigenous people have done, as enslaved African people who were kidnapped and enslaved and brought to this country and to South America as well, to the whole Western, rose again and again in rebellions and fought against it. again and again tried to free themselves from this. And so now we are getting to the point of Zionism cannot be satisfied with that, and they are resorting to the complete genocide of the Palestinians. So this is one aspect that we see a lot of similarities between the settler colonial project in the Western Hemisphere, and specifically if we want to talk about North America, Turtle Island, and in the Zionist settler colonial regime in Palestine, to talk about some of the similarities. I don't have time to get in all of it, but also I will talk about main issues. The date itself, the so-called birthday of the United States, July 4th, 1776, we think of it as Palestinians as the indigenous Nakba. For us, May 15th, 1948, the date of the declaration of so-called independence by the State of Israel, is the Palestinian Nakba, is the anniversary on which the Zionist movement displaced at least three-quarter of a million of Palestinians, pushed them deliberately and with a very precise social engineering to push them out towards Lebanon, towards Egypt, towards what was at the time the East Jordan, in order to clear the lands of Palestinians at the time, and they continue to do that again and again. And I don't have time to get into the Dahiya doctrine, to get into the all of the doctrines that Israel has used and continue using. This requires much more discussions, but this has continued since 1948 and continues after. There are so many villages that have been destroyed, and completely over 500 villages, and some of them that have not been destroyed have been turned into, the mosque have been turned into discos and bars. There is a lot of destruction that has been going on. The third point, and I don't have lots of more points. I want lots of time, so I want to speak about two other points. One is the United States a nation state? Many of the U.S. so-called scholars, whether you're talking about the right wing or you're talking about the liberals, basically actually think that this is a good project, but there are some bad apples that they will go away. And Trump, that maybe they don't agree with everything Trump says, but it's just bad apples, and share some of the things that there is freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom under the law. That's what he actually said, which is very interesting if we look at his behavior and at his cronies who actually stole the wealth, who actually destroyed even the IRS, they destroyed the courts, they did change all these things. They even pressured FIFA, the football structure, to allow players who weren't supposed to be there to change the rules. Very, very interesting to do that. But I want to actually talk specifically about the ways in which left, liberal, radical scholars actually think of the U.S. as a nation state. And I want to argue against this being a nation state, and I want to argue against people who say this is our country, and think about buying into the problematic way of buying into the question that this is the American, or these are the American people, and so on, and argue against the settler colonial project that is an imperialistic project, and not only so-called foreign, but also within. And I argue against foreign domestic, because I think they are very much connected together. And think about the whole question again about assimilationist and incorporation of people into Washington, into the U.S. project itself, however they think about it, whether they think about it as imperialistic or not imperialistic, into this thing that this is something that actually separates people, all people, working class people, people of color, indigenous people, African American people, from their struggle with other people around the world, that at one point was going to be Bandung, or was to be the third world, had alliances with other people, socialist countries, socialist blocs. As one of our comrades spoke also about China, what it did at the time. I don't have much time to talk about that, but think about the liberation struggle that we can be part of, instead of actually allying ourselves with some reactionary project that seduces people into thinking that this is a country that really cares about its people, rather than the 1% of white supremacy that's supported by white supremacy, like Zionism. Okay, the last point that I wanted to make is the question of, is the United States collapsing. I do agree that the United States philosophy and ideology is collapsing a little bit, but we are a very long way from collapsing it itself, because it is armed to the teeth and it's still sending weapons of destruction. But I think what has happened, and I agree with all my comrades on the platform, that the Iranian victory and the fact that Iran, a country of the third world, stood up, and not only stood up to the US, but actually dealt it a lot of defeats, is a very important point. And also, I want to also say that the Palestinian resistance and Palestinians over 100 years have stood up and said, we're not going to give up. We're not going to accept being colonized again and again and crushed. We're not going to accept your narratives, and we're going to continue struggling despite the cost that we are taking. We're going to continue, and the whole world have collaborated with Palestine and expressed solidarity and so on. And the whole world is expressing solidarity with Cuba and other people around the world. This is something that shows here in the capitalist countries, within the belly of the beast, the United States itself, and outside of it, that there is something that is moving on. The United States stands alone, even against its NATO allies who are working against it and don't agree in this craziness of waging more and more wars. The international arena is standing against it, and people are standing against it. If we are successful in stopping the arms shipments, in depriving the United States from its weapons and its military abilities and so on, and divert the budget towards the needs that we have, we are going to win. And we see the United Auto Workers, we see the demonstrations in the streets, we even see the liberal winning in the elections. We see all of this stuff happening. This is a signal that we will win, probably even sooner than later. Thank you.
Hope you feel better. Okay, next we're going to hear from Chiri, who's representing Bronx Antiwar. It's a working class, Black, Indigenous, people of color led, anti-imperialist, direct action coalition resisting state violence while advancing decolonization.
All right, I'll try to keep a smile on my face. I've been mourning all week. So I was asked to speak on the prospects for the global struggle. Let me start with the conclusion. The future is bright. Not because the empire has gotten kinder. It hasn't. The future is bright because the nations resisting empire are standing, they are strong, and they are winning. Let's start with Iran. Days ago, the world watched the largest funeral in human history. Millions upon millions filled the streets of Tehran and the streets of Iraq as well to mourn Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei. And let's put respect on his name and be clear about who he was. He was not only the leader of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, he was a leader of free people everywhere, a leader in Iraq, and wherever Shia Muslims embraced his path of using faith to fight imperialism, colonialism, and Zionism. And beyond that, a leader for every person whose mind has been liberated from Western propaganda. That is what being free means, at least to me for now. Free in our minds. He was our leader too. The US and Israel assassinated him on February 28th because they believed a simple theory. Kill the leader and the state crumbles. They were wrong. The Islamic Revolution is not one man. It is an ideology ingrained in the masses, in the working class of Iran, and it will outlast any single leader. All the US accomplished was to create a martyr and make the people more defiant. Because in Shia Islam, martyrdom is not defeat. Dying in resistance to imperialism is the highest honor a human being can achieve. That is the tradition that Khamenei championed, as Khomeini did before him. And it is exactly what the empire cannot comprehend. The people have been in the streets every single day since his martyrdom. That is more than 130 days of nonstop mobilization in Iran, in Iraq, across the region, and even in the heart of the empire. We honored him in the Bronx. We dedicated our July 4th district to his legacy because he lives forever in our hearts and minds. The assassination did not weaken the Islamic Republic, it strengthened it. And now the memorandum of understanding between Iran and the US is collapsing because Washington violates everything it signs. The lesson could not be clearer. You cannot negotiate with terrorists, and the United States is the world's largest terrorist organization. Zionism is terrorism. These are child killers and genocidal criminals, and Iran is the one nation that has stood up and fought back against them. And the people of Iran are not hiding what they feel. At the funeral, mourners carried banners in English directly threatening Donald Trump. Eulogy speakers openly called for the deaths of Trump and Netanyahu, and millions in the crowd answered with chants of revenge. No compromise, no surrender, only revenge. The streets of Tehran are demanding revenge because the people understand that violence is the only language Washington speaks. China gives us hope. Look at the United States today. The standard of living for the working class is falling. Addiction, housing insecurity, poverty, food insecurity, people walking away from education and healthcare because they cannot afford them. Bridges and roads are literally falling apart. Now look at China. The standard of living is rising, and China is beating the US and Europe in engineering, technology, and infrastructure. High-speed rail, subways, highways, airports, bridges. The world's top supercomputer was built entirely on Chinese chips. That is socialist development under communist leadership, and it works. Russia gives us hope. Be clear about what happened there. The United States carried out regime change in Ukraine. It took over the government, took over the military, put white supremacists in charge, and used that country to attack Russia. And it failed. Russia defended itself, absorbed everything NATO could throw at it, and is advancing on the battlefield today. The DPRK gives us hope. For decades, we were told it was starving and about to collapse. Now, even the New York Times or the New York War Crimes and the Wall Street Journal are forced to admit its economy is booming, built on decades of investing in its own industry and its own people. And Burkina Faso gives us hope. Under Captain Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso is decolonizing, kicking out the French and reclaiming its resources. And Traore has mass popular support, not just at home, but around the entire world. Now, here is the lesson, and I want it to be unmistakable. Iran, China, Russia, and the DPRK are standing because they invested in defense, missile programs, drone programs, military capacity. That is deterrence. The empire does not respond to goodwill. It responds to force. Armed resistance, armed struggle is the only path to liberation. That is the takeaway of this era. And it explains the losses, which we name honestly. Syria fell to regime change in December 2024. The US installed Jolani and HTS, which is Al-Qaeda and ISIS rebranded. But notice, they still have not been able to turn Syria against Hezbollah, the way the plan called for, because Washington cannot give its puppets capability or legitimacy. Even their victories are shrinking. In Venezuela, on January 3rd, the United States carried out a terrorist bombing attack on Caracas that killed over 100 Venezuelans and Cubans and kidnapped President Nicolas Maduro and first combatant Celia Flores, who are now rotting in a Brooklyn jail. There is no word for that but terrorism. The country is being forced open to foreign capital while Israel worms its way in behind earthquake aid. And Cuba is liberalizing under an energy blockade that is killing babies in hospitals. Why Cuba and Venezuela? Because the US failed against Iran, failed against Russia, and cannot even touch China or the DPRK. So it attacks nations that have the support of their people, but never develop the military capability to deter it. That proves the lesson again. And understand what Cuba and Venezuela are doing. They're surviving, not capitulating. China was criticized the exact same way when it opened up decades ago. Now China is the model they are learning from and adapting to their own conditions. That is strategic retreat. That is long-term thinking. And we are in this struggle for the long term. Which brings me to us. Some so-called Western leftists are busy right now criticizing Cuba and Venezuela for their reforms. Let me be blunt. It is your own government strangling these nations. Your critique should always be aimed at the root cause, US imperialism. You are not sanctioned, you are not blockaded, you're not being bombed. You have no right to criticize any nation that is under attack by US imperialism. So here is exactly where we stand. The United States lost its war against Iran. It lost its war against Russia. It cannot stop China's rise. It cannot crush the DPRK like it wants to. At home, it is rotting. Its only remaining move is to attack nations that cannot fight back. And even there, it can wound revolutions, but not kill them. Meanwhile, Palestine is still standing. Gaza is still resisting. The West Bank continues to resist. And the resistance will continue. 3 things to take home. 1, the nations that arm themselves are winning, and armed struggle is the only path to liberation. 2, the nations forced to retreat are surviving, not surrendering, and they deserve our unconditional defense, not our criticism. 3, our job inside the empire is to always fight US imperialism, the enemy of all of humanity. Our job is to build unconditional solidarity with resistance to US imperialism. Our job is to fight propaganda and demonization campaigns. Our job is to organize our communities and neighborhoods. The US-led Western empire is declining, the resistance is rising, and that is why the future is bright. Thank you.
Okay.
Comrades, this has been an incredible, really an incredible panel. And it just breathes revolutionary optimism. The future is bright. Our challenge is how to get the US working class to identify, to defend the world working class, and not their own vicious, racist ruling class. That's the challenge. Who do you identify? And it's always been our challenge. Is it possible? Can we really play a role in turning this around? Now, changing consciousness has revolutionary potential. Mass consciousness in the working class can change radically, swiftly, overnight. Mass consciousness in the working class can be based on a racist killing, a vicious ICE attack, a trans or homophobic attack, and racism and national and gender oppression are baked into US political life. Or will the change come based on a US war? The US has been at war 90% of its history. Or will it be based on an economic collapse? And I want to get back to that. But we need to challenge ourselves to look at this new global reality. Because what happens when US wars are unwinnable? When the whole political establishment is imploding? When the US global economic position is in an irreversible slide? What happens? Now, revolutionaries are always seeking to see the world beyond the curve. What event will it be, and how do we prepare for rapid changes in political consciousness that because that's what can change the balance of forces globally. Swift changes in political consciousness are more possible. And I think the identification with the Palestinian resistance, it's a sea change. With the resistance, with the right to resist, Zionism in this country was so baked in to the political parties, the union movement, the major religious groupings, the corporate media. It seemed unchangeable. And we were more than willing to be out there for years, but it was small groups. It was difficult defense lines. Israel is now terrified because Zionism is hated. It's a global liability for the empire. It really is so hated. And so is the empire. But sympathy for Palestinians didn't shift the view on Iran. Although the US provoked war on Iran has been a massive failure, a huge setback for the US empire, 16 of its 18 military bases out of commission. They're out of West Asia. And the majority of the population was against this unprovoked US war. It didn't mean, though, that they identified with the Iranian people. And this war was, as Carlos said, the last throw of the dice. But what impact will the funeral of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei have? The new US bombing cannot reverse Iran's sovereign control of the Strait of Hormuz. A new round of bombing or the end of this memorandum is not going to give the US control back. It will add more fire, more determination, more rage. Now, the throngs of 10 million people in Tehran, July 4th, and every day, these 6 days, the 6-day funeral in the millions. And there's been 100 days and more of demonstrations in every city in Iran, in the millions. Now, to the funeral came global dignitaries, resistance leaders from more than 100 countries, including heads of state, foreign ministers, senior representatives. Now, I want to add, for those of us here, it's significant that the only public event held in the US was organized a few months ago by Bronx Antiwar, by Workers' World Party, and several determined anti-imperialist groupings at Washington Square Park. And we had to hold our ground against a mob of royalists and Zionists and MAGA thugs. Now, it's not surprising that we're kind of ahead of the curve here in the US, but we're not out of touch with the global movement. And what we did, while it wasn't very big, it was determined, and it got attention around the world. That there was a group here in the US that would salute, that would defend, and would stand with Iran and with Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. That was important. Well, now, we should put this, I'm going to put this photo back up here. Thank you, Jay, for bringing it. Globally and in Iran, there's deep admiration for a leader who spent decades preparing Iran to defend its gains, to advance with cohesion through the hardest US sanctions, assassinations, coup attempts, and who built unity not only in Iran, but was the force behind the axis of resistance. Revolutionary unity, that was the most powerful weapon. The weapons, yes, they did develop the weapons, but they built the unity in Iran and in the whole region. Resistance became a real force. Now, They certainly did build in Iran. It's a top country globally in overall STEM graduates, especially engineering degrees, top country. Second only to China. That's kind of incredible. 90 million people, but top in engineering and science and technology. Nearly 70% of the STEM graduates are women. Top that. Now, the continuing funeral, it's an enormous event, and it's held with deep fervor, and it's preparation and mobilization for the next stage in the continuing US-Israeli war on Iran. And everyone knows it's coming. They didn't need Trump to announce this is the end of the memorandum. Nope. But this funeral is reasserting Iran's sovereignty, its alliances, its direction. It's not just a funeral. It's a display of national unity, of regional leverage. It's a rallying point of defiance. Now, these red flags, there's a sea of red flags. Doesn't mean communism in Iran. Red flags are a symbol around the world, but in Iran, the red flags stand for a call for vengeance, for saying no compromise. And it goes right along with the resounding chants of death to America that are every night chanted by tens of millions. And this resonates, and it's burned into memory and into outlook. Now, there was no US delegation, of course, at these events. 100 countries, but not the US. Or most of the NATO countries were overwhelmingly absent. There was only mockery from Trump, dismissing this huge public turnout and asserting that there was an overwhelming US victory in Iran. Absolutely nobody believes this, even in the US, even in their think tanks. The whole world has seen the impact of Iran's drones and missiles, the US loss of 16 of 18 US bases in West Asia. They've seen the limits of US weapons. And that changes consciousness on what's possible. Capital investment bubble in capitalism's history. Tech giants, venture funds are pouring trillions into physical infrastructure, 500 data centers, chips, but end user revenue has no way of matching these costs. And there's a massive gap between Wall Street expectations. Today's New York Times business page, it's the only part of the corporate news really worth reading. Today's headline was on Intel. And it said after teetering on collapse, they had a lift based on Trump-fueled comeback. Billions of dollars. Trump put billions of US dollars into Intel to survive it. And then it said, if it doesn't survive, it dooms the entire US chip industry. This multi-billion-dollar bailout and the future of Intel will trigger a catastrophic domino effect across US defense, technology, and economic infrastructure. They're talking about they are losing sleep over this bubble. Now, they have the other headlines in that business paper about how war with Iran has upset the markets and an IMF warning of a global slowdown based on the war with Iran. So the US economy is not doing well. I'll make a closing point on China and thank Carlos for really quite a summary. This week was also the 105th anniversary of the founding of the Communist Party of China. Barely noted here, but there were big, confident events in hundreds, and there are hundreds of Chinese cities on how to reinforce socialist direction in China in building socialist modernization in all aspects. So the anniversary of the Communist Party was a confident assertion. We published here an anthology called China Changes Everything. It does. And we did this with allies and friends who were committed to defending China as a socialist revolution. We're working with a group who helped it here, very much in solidarity with it in Britain, called Friends of Socialist China. Not just Friends of China. Now, the People's Republic of China, it's a global resource. It's a lifeline for asserting sovereignty, new opportunities of the Belt and Road, its influence in BRICS. So the anniversary, but also came with a strong word of caution. In all these 100 cities in China, President Xi Jinping's address said, we must be prepared to withstand major tests involving high winds, rough waves, and stormy seas. So these events were an assertion of socialist planning, but also saying, be prepared for global upheaval. That's why the world is bringing down the empire. It's revolutionary enthusiasm, but it is also a warning of a very chaotic time coming. Because we know, as Marxists, that change breaks through, enormous changes in technology, in industry, you can't stop it. Changes in global communication, and it radically changes social relations right here in the center of the empire. It will shred the hold they thought they had. Just like the hold they thought Zionism had on the masses here. It can change, and it will change. Workers are in touch on a global basis, and change doesn't ask for permission. We're in a moment of huge change on a global scale. It'll be violent, it'll be stormy, it'll be unpredictable, and it's desperately needed. And this $1.5 trillion military budget won't save it. It'll actually destroy it. It will. So our weapon and our task is our ability to concretely build unity and solidarity with the oppressed of our class here and globally. And that's why we have revolutionary optimism.
Yeah. And let's give a big hand to all of our panelists. I'm going to be taking names of people who want to speak here, and Haley, a brilliant tech person. She's going to be taking a stack of people on Zoom who would like to speak. And our protocol for discussion is to prioritize comments from people of color, women, queer, transgender, non-conforming people, people with disabilities, young people, and those who have not spoken yet. And I'll be calling people in a certain order. You can direct your questions to any of our panelists, but try to keep your comments to no more than 2 to 3 minutes to allow as much discussion as possible. And you must come up to the front if you're in this office to speak, so everybody on Zoom will be able to see you. And then we want to leave enough time at the end for any of our panelists who would like to make any closing remarks. So we should keep that in mind. So the floor is now open to anyone who would like to speak. And of course, questions are encouraged.
I got one.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to? Anybody here? Okay, Anna Maria? And who's on Zoom who would like to speak? Oh, John Cat. Okay, anyone else? Oh, Larry from Texas. So I'm going to start with Anna Maria, and then Larry, and then John Cat in that order. You should come up.
Hi, everyone. I'm hoping some of the panelists can talk about how they see indigenous governance systems in connection with global solidarity.
Thank you, Anna Maria.
Yes.
Hope y'all are taking note of that question. Okay, Larry on Zoom.
Yes, thank you, comrades, and very much great words was said today, and especially the emphasis that we've made on just showing solidarity with our comrades in the global South who, as stated, are fighting a revolutionary fight, not only for the right of self-determination and liberation, but also survival, as stated by the comrades on here. Comrades have literally paid with their lives and become martyrs. They've lost everything, but are still fighting. This is shown with the funeral for uh, for the funeral in Iran, with thousands upon thousands of Iranian comrades, calling, not only for the defeat of the U.S., but also the just action being taken to not let the death of the the Ayatollah be in vain, because what we saw when the Ayatollah was assassinated was not this act of supposed Iranian aggression that the ruling classes claimed it was, but as simple as murder. And mind you, when talking about the 250th anniversary of the United States, the founding of it, let's not forget that the U.S. engaged in assassinations, not only abroad, but here at home, taken, against leaders of the Black Panther Party, against indigenous leaders in wars that they would lose, their assassination of indigenous revolutionaries like Sitting Bull and others. But just this is the character of the United States, especially when they talk about, that they stopped, the aggression of the Zionists in Israel, of supposedly breaking up a treaty. Mind you, the United States has a history of breaking up treaties, especially with indigenous people. And then another thing I wanted us to touch on was also how the U.S. is engaging in violence against Haiti. The people of Haiti have been paying the brunt of the price for being one of the first countries, one of the first, especially Black countries, to gain their liberation in the Haitian Revolution. And the U.S. responded to that under the reactionary Jefferson administration by sanctioning them and threatening that if the Haitians did not pay this fee that they've been paying literally for centuries, they would invade them. And they cannot stand the thought that the Haitians have continued to survive. And this is something that the US hates. They hate the thought of people in the global South surviving. So not only should we, recognize this as a struggle here at home for the working class, but also the struggle abroad. Because as stated by comrades, we are in a position of comfortability. We're in a position of privilege, that the privilege that comrades in the global South don't have. Comrades in Gaza don't have it. Comrades in Iran, comrades in Sudan, and especially comrades in Congo don't have it. And so it's especially for us to, tell those who are, trying to propose this position of, making peace with the state or making peace with the ruling class by reform. We tell them, no, we don't make peace with the ruling class. We don't make peace with murderers. We don't make peace with them. No, we say that as long as the murder of our comrades in the global South is happening, there's no such thing as peace. There's only such thing as revolutionary action being taken. That revolutionary action is continuously haunting the ruling class. Everywhere they go, we follow them. And that's what we shall do. Thank you.
Oh, John Cat, you're next.
Yeah. Thank you, Monica. I just want to say what Comrade Sarah brought out, the need of us to attempt to get to convince the working class in the United States to identify their struggles with the struggles of all of humanity, of all the people in the global South, of all the people of all the fellow workers in the rest of the world. There was a small but very important, I believe, example of this that just happened on the July 4th weekend. And it's reported right now, anybody goes on to the Workers Org, the Workers World newspaper site. At the top of the site is a report on the demonstration that took place in Philadelphia. And it was a demonstration that was led by veterans of the U.S. military, and with some participation by active duty personnel. And so there's a very thorough and interesting article that's mainly written by Comrade Joe Pete and Comrade Michael Kramer and Comrade Joe Hirsch. They're all veterans who were involved in the demonstration, but there were hundreds of veterans and some dozens of active duty personnel, and they held a very disciplined demonstration with signs that did identify with the oppressed of the world and did identify with the anti-war struggle. So it's a beginning of something but it should give us confidence that it's possible that something could be happening. What's going to happen in the military, should the Trump administration expand the war or attempt to, that we don't know right now. But we do know that this was a good sign. And I hope that all the comrades read the article and try and get a feel for what this might mean and discuss it and try and figure out and be aware of the possibility. That's the main thing. That's it. That's all I want to say.
Veterans Against Fascism. I don't know if you mentioned that earlier. Yeah, very exciting. Okay, another stack. Okay, I have Cleo, Michael Harsh. Anybody else in here like to speak? These are two on Zoom. Okay, so let's go with Cleo and then Michael.
Hello. I wanted to say that I feel that what's happening with Dr. Hussam Abu Safia is a turning point because if you think about it, like there's this magnified call to release him, and yet it seems that he's near his end. I mean, he said, "This is the last you'll hear from me," and he's been beaten beyond recognition. And my thought about it is, if he dies in detention, wouldn't that spark a possible rebellion? I mean, the whole thing, obviously this has happened to many doctors before in Gaza, but this one is pivotal. So I would think that this is something to really focus on. And it's a point of international solidarity too, because you think about it, healthcare is denied to masses of people worldwide. I mean, in the United States, most people, I think most people don't have healthcare. A Cuban doctor going to Venezuela to help people, that's an unusual thing, but because they're socialist, they view medical care as belonging to all people. And so I believe, anyway, I wanted to just say that I feel that Dr. Hussam Abu Safia is a turning point and someone to really focus on right now. Thank you.
Michael?
Yeah,
Are you
yes. Yeah, I mean, I know you were talking about the relationship between China and Africa. Well, I certainly agree that China treats Africa and the rest of the world better than the US does. What I heard is that, like in Namibia, China hires Chinese workers to do the job rather than the local Namibian workers. I mean, how is that going to help Africa to develop?
So that's your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, we'll definitely deal with that question. Thank you. Okay, Brian?
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, I'm as raised. I'm on the bee. Thank you, Paul, for uh putting for speaking some class truth. I want to put out something for the comrades on the panel. Um, some of you may know that the day before Juneteenth, the the administration of the disgusting Epstein class had put out their so-called Department of Justice had put out a memo, basically saying that states do not need to comply with the laws of making sure that folk with disabilities are not consigned to institutions by taking away the Medicaid supported uh, um, uh, 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 um, home and community based services. This is on the heels of Texas and 7 other states suing to uh, to quash the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehab Act of 1973. And this is also on the heels of the ruling class pillaging Medicaid and SNAP and other social supports of the year previously of $1 trillion for the next 10 years. And that has gone directly to the military industrial complex, to the trillionaires and billionaires, and it is is what Engels wrote about in 1850 as social murder. There is a movement that is organizing to counter this stuff, and it's surmounting its own challenges and contradictions, and it's breaking out of isolation and dealing with the issue of disability globally, and dealing with the national question in the movement here in the Valley of the East. And it's just keeping in mind that capitalism creates mass disabling events along with genocides in order to steal land, labor, and resources. It has done that for 500 years. So I just wanted to call that to people's attention. Thank you very much, comrades. It's a great discussion.
I have Ernesto. Anybody else here? This is probably the final stat. Anybody else? Is that it, Haley? Except for Ernesto. Okay. Anyone else here before? And then we'll call on the panelists to make any final remarks. Oh, Michael? Okay. So why don't we go with Ernesto and then Michael and then the panelists. Go ahead, Ernesto.
Hello there. Can I ask questions?
Sure.
All right, I got 2 questions. I hope you guys can answer. First is, I currently live in so-called Los Angeles. I was wondering how I could help President Maduro and the first combatant for Celia Flores over here. How can I help and assist the movement? And my second question is, I am currently a community college student, and I am wondering how I could organize my campus for Palestine, for Cuba, for Venezuela, for Lebanon, etc. Please and thank you.
Thank you, Ernesto. Great questions. Great, okay. And Michael.
Hey, good evening, comrades, and thanks to all the panelists. This is a question for any of the panelists. A few weeks ago, I was in a local coffee shop conversation with somebody who I didn't really know too well. And I had mentioned that I had seen this travel video of the city of Vladivostok. And gee, what a beautiful city it was. And the response I got was, "Are you for Putin?" Now, the response I got from observing a travelogue video of the city of Vladivostok,
Which is there in.
which is in part of the Russian Federation, was, "Are you for Putin?" And it got me to thinking that this is an issue that we really don't discuss too much, but the Russophobia that we're up against. And I know Che mentioned Burkina Faso. And when we talk about Burkina Faso, we also have to talk about Niger and Mali, who they're in a strong alliance with, an alliance becoming almost a confederation. Really a step forward that we should pay attention to. But these countries are under attack, under military attack, as they leave the junior partner of U.S. imperialism, the French imperialism and the colonial vestiges. They are under armed attack, and particularly Mali. And Mali is a country probably twice the size of Texas, with an army of 18,000. So, how can you cover a territory like that? Well, the way they cover it is with the help of the Russian Federation. And the Russian Federation has given the Alliance of Sahel states so much assistance that they couldn't continue being independent without this assistance, military assistance. At the same time, the Russian Federation is in a war with NATO. I mean, it's been very clear. There might have been confusion about the struggle between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, 10 years ago when it broke out in 2000, even before that in 2014. But it's very clear that it's a struggle with NATO. And it seems to be getting more dangerous every day. I mean, the little Baltic countries, known as the little Chihuahuas by some, now inviting nuclear weapons. So my question to the panelists is, how best can we fight this sophisticated Russophobia that we encounter as we defend the Sahel Alliance, which relies so much on Russian military support. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, now we're going to call on our panelists. Rabab, did you want to say anything since you're on Zoom? Would you like to respond or say
Sure, but I was wondering what my other comrades want to speak. I could start, no problem. People don't know, but I wanted to also speak about one of the comrades mentioned about the whole question of COINTELPRO, the assassination the Black Panthers and others didn't mention COINTELPRO, but it is the counterintelligence program under which it was by the FBI, and it was discovered by people who were actually searching for the new Federalist Papers around about Vietnam, and they stumbled upon it. And anyway, it's really, really important. There is a documentary about it. I show it in my classes because sometimes my students don't believe it when I tell them and I say, here's the truth. Okay. It's always seeing is believing sometimes, but I think it's really important. And there is about Haiti. I'm just giving some information now. We have a comrade of ours who is Haitian, who also teaches in the US and who went with us to Palestine. And we've been working a lot around the occupation of Haiti and the occupation of Palestine. And she argues around the ways in which the US and the United Nations also, and it's really important because the United Nations also played a terrible role, because everybody thinks the United Nations is great. The United Nations played a terrible role in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. The United Nations brigades came in and they actually facilitated the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. It was the only brigade, was the Egyptian one, that basically put aside the wife and the children of Patrice Lumumba and escaped them to Egypt. And Jamal Abdel Nasser at the time, who is supposedly monster by the West and the US, took them in and treated them as his own children, and brought them up. And the same with like Nkrumah and other people. And so there is a whole, we did a lot of it this past year because it was the 100th anniversary of the assassination of Lumumba. It was the birth of Malcolm X and the Fanon, and we will continue doing that because all of these commemorations are really important for us to revisit what has happened and think about what are the real narratives of what has happened, not the false myths that the colonialists do. But it's also, of course, the U.S. has been colonizing Haiti, has been since the day one, have been this kind of, how dare you have a Haitian Republic? But I'm going to stick to some of the stuff that was about Palestine, and maybe, unless other colleagues want to take it up, the question of the indigeneity, governance, and solidarity, but I'll wait to see if other people want to take about it. Otherwise, I will do. But the video of Ghassan Kanafani, it specifically speaks to when people say, "Are you against peace?" When you are supporting people who are struggling for themselves, defending themselves, rising against the colonizers, why aren't you for peace? So I think this video would be very, very important. For the comrade who asked about the DOJ and the whole question about the ADA, Americans with Disability Act, I'm just one of the people who have actually suffered a lot because my university has been denying me the disabilities, and usually disabilities in order to weaponize and shut down the program, which focuses on Palestine and other aspects of justice. They don't want me to teach that because they want to do the Trump program. But I want to say for the comrade who asked about Hussam Abu Safiya, it's a very, very important issue. We actually hosted his lawyer along with other people who are with Doctors Against Genocide. We had done it. I don't remember when, but if you go to the YouTube and look at Ahmed at San Francisco State, even though it doesn't belong to the university, because the university refuses to fund it. So we're doing it, okay, like freely on our own labor. But check it out. It's called something about humanity. And we spoke to his lawyer. She spoke in Arabic. I translated for her what's happening with him. And people don't know about Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. He was a director of a hospital that refused to allow the Israeli military to come and search the hospital and destroy it and go after patients who were injured and so on. He was doing his job. He was following the medical oath, and they refused. They refused to allow anybody from international societies and so on because they want to teach him a lesson and teach other doctors. He wasn't. There's other doctors who died also because of rape, because of torture, because of other things in Gaza, and it's horrifying to other people of the world. But Israel, and when we say that this is a fascist, settler, colonial, violent, racist state, people kind of like think, oh, but Israel began as a nice sort of like fulfilling the dream and so on. There was never a dream. And this is the problem, is that really, even when people say now they know that there is genocide, they say, oh, how did this happen? It was some bad apples. From the beginning, this was a project about emptying the land from indigenous people to kind of take it over. And this is what has happened again and again and again. When we Palestinians say that this is genocide from the beginning, we are labeled as anti-Semites, just like the government now, the EEOC, which is supposed to monitor anybody who does any attempts to Jew hatred or anything of the sort. We are accused of it because we're speaking the truth. Even our comrades who are Jewish, who have been large numbers, not small. We can't actually count them on the five hands or 10 numbers or something. Many, many, many. They're called Gestapo or lovers of Nazism, and we're called anti-Semitic. We're all called liars, even though the truth is very clear. And Israel doesn't even shy about advertising. It's very clear there. This is the truth. We're speaking the truth. This is what's happening. And if people don't stop it and there is going to continue. It's getting worse and worse. But this is what's happening to Dr. Abu Safia. And honestly, comrade, whose title is Rebel Girl, I don't know if there is going to be an outcry. There are horrible things. Something that really, really horrified me is when they prevented feeding blankets to the kids, the babies. And babies died because their blood vessels froze. Babies died because their blood, and I was having nightmares. And I'm Palestinian. I heard a lot of horrifying stories. How could you allow something like this? They allowed it because they want to finish Palestinians. This is the reality. Why are they assassinating intellectuals? Why they are always after us? Every time somebody speaks up and says anything about curriculum or anything like that, they want to shut us up. And I think this is really important to talk about this and connected. One more thing, if you don't mind saying, and I don't want to comment on my comrade Michael Kramer. I've known you for a very long time, and I love you. But I want to just say about. I want to just contradict my colleague who said that people in the U.S. are privileged. I think people in the working class, poor people, people who have no money, no shelter, and so on. I don't think they are more privileged than everybody in the third world. I think there are people in the third world that are benefiting because they do collaborate with imperialism. They do, like Arab countries that are allowing U.S. to have its bases on their lands, and this is treason, and we wrote statements about it. And one of our comrades in Palestine was imprisoned by the Palestinian Authority because they wanted him to change it, take it out, and we said no. We said he said I'm not allowed. My comrade said no, you cannot change it. So we do have that. We have people. We have fat cats. I mean, it's not comparable to the U.S., but we do have people like that, and we have people here in the U.S. who are poor, who are working class, who don't have medical aid, who don't have. So I think it's really important to think about that there is global South within the global North, and there is global North within the global South, and we really need to think about it in terms of class, in terms of race, in terms of gender, in terms of all these. Could put all of these variables together, and we said there are people who want injustice and there are people who want justice, and we all come together against those people who want to destroy us, and we need to fight and never let them crush us. I mean, this is really the reality, because if they crush any of us, they crush all of us. Thank you.
Comrades, I just have a general point. In response to the questions about what's going on with the indigenous people, their ideas about self-government, liberation, and even questions about like the one the comrade raised about how to help him in the Bay Area.
Southern California.
Southern California. It would be good, and in a way, this depends on comrades and friends, fellow travelers, and other organizations like the organizations that were represented on the panel. It depends on their understanding and desire to see this as a turning point. This was a modest program in many ways, but the ideas were not modest at all. They were taking what's going on in the world and trying to look forward. What's coming and how do we prepare for it? And this is necessary to developing a sharper revolutionary orientation to the future. We would submit that you can't really call yourself a revolutionary, at least as we communists see revolutionaries. You know, that's a big question, but hopefully you'll accept my qualification. Unless you're able to not only live in the present and respond to the struggles that are occurring now, understand the past, what's important about the past, but also be forward looking, especially at a time when change and history and everything demands that revolutionaries do whatever is required of them to be looking forward. They don't have to have, a exact strategy, by the numbers. That's impossible, actually. But you have to respond to what's going on in the world. And these things are not connected, the past, the present, and the future. They're no less, separate. That, even though geography and language and culture divides us, it doesn't really divide us. That's the hope. That's one of the big points of tonight's discussion. That these things are important. They exist. They will continue to exist. But they are not, and they cannot separate the world struggle. And the kind of consciousness that comrades were speaking to, and we're getting there. It's an uneven process. It's the kind of consciousness where more and more of us don't even think of the struggle as just being confined, to a nation state, a locality. It is, but it isn't. It's a contradictory phenomena. So you have to want to continue this forward-looking discussion. I would hope that you would take tonight as an effort to open up a new forward-looking discussion, and it would be a good idea. And this means a lot of things, but more meetings that are thought about. What does the LGBTQ community, particularly trans activists, what do they think of here's a new question. Not only what you're doing now in response to all of the shit that's happening, but what do you think of the big changes in the world and how does that affect your struggle? Same thing with migrant workers who are under attack. What do you think about what's happening even beyond, if that's even possible? It may not be possible. The fact that ICE and stormtroopers are waging war on your community. Young people, I was struck about the concern about the pessimism. I don't know whether that describes it completely, but that's certainly a factor. A feeling of powerlessness. We need to have a meeting where young people talk about, well, not only what they felt for a while, but are they thinking about changes? And we need to be interested in that. We have the right the obligation as a party and as communists to have our own view. But that doesn't mean that we don't have an ear and a need to know what other sectors of our class. We need trade unionists. We need trade unionists to come and sit here and tell us, what do you think about what's going on in the world, about the big changes? We need the indigenous. We need the Haitians. We need get Burkina Faso. You know, we need everybody. We need women to come and say, but not only to talk about what they're dealing with, but to the extent that's realistic, to talk about it in the wake of what's going on in the world, and anti-imperialist forces and other revolutionary organizations, which is something we attempted to do now. I think that's that won't solve all of our problems, but it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge for the party, and it's a big challenge for the party's allies, both old, both recent, and new.
There's Sarah T.
Well, I'm going to deal with the person who asked the question about Chinese labor and why isn't Namibian labor hired in projects in Namibia? So it's a good example of U.S. conscious disinformation, and they are investing millions of dollars in media in Africa to raise some of these charges. So, but it's easy to look up. It's easy to counter. So I decided I would look up what are China's investments in Namibia and how many people does it employ. So just the basic in mining and energy and infrastructure employs 10,500 Namibians. And then there's a whole economy around that of other Namibians, and a total of 700 Chinese people. So it's not hard to punch a hole in what is just said again and again. And that's something which is raised continually. Now, China is making huge investments in Africa, the first time ever. 400 years of Western colonialism, never a building of the roads and the railroads and the ports and the infrastructure to really liberate Africa and to help them develop their own resources. And China has invested heavily in that. And the US has invested heavily in media throughout Africa to say this is a debt trap. They're really going to trap you in huge, unpayable debts, and only China benefits. Now, again, it's not hard to dispute this. You could look this up. What's China's total debts, loans, and whatnot, and the total African debt. China's total debt in Africa of the total amount is 12%. 88% of the debt African countries is to Western banks and corporations. That's important because you wouldn't know it if you just hear this endless stream of propaganda. And it's not hard to look it up. And Western banks and corporations, when they make loans, it starts at 5%. That's pretty high on a world scale. And the conditions are pretty onerous, what you have to buy of US products and so on, how the marketing handled. China, they charge 5%. China charges 2.5% to 2.7%. It's like half. in terms of interest rates and has completely flexible, long-term, turning it over, forgiving debts, and so on record. So this is important because Africa as a continent and its countries are the largest recipient of Belt and Road development funding. And it's been used to build, as I say, roads, railroads, ports, bridges, what's called the Green Silk Road in terms of power generation. It's extensive and it's having a big impact. But here, you wouldn't know that. So whenever you hear a really hostile thing, just take a minute, and I would say that to the person who asked the question about Namibia. It just is a short fact check on your phone with lots of sources given to counter this. And I think US propaganda is powerful. The corporate media of the US is still the largest in the world and the most powerful in many, many ways culturally. It's powerful here, but its impact around the world to spread disinformation, to spread racism, to spread division and hostility, to set countries against each other, to create internal dissension. That's the purpose of media for the empire. It's how they rule, by division. And how we have an impact is encountering that and showing that real solidarity is possible and really builds real development going forward. So I think that was, I wanted to touch on one other point that John Catalnato made about the Veterans March in Philadelphia. I wasn't there. Michael Kramer and Joe Hirsch and Joe Piet were, but I looked at whole video streams and Flickr pictures that Joe Piet took. And what struck me was both how incredibly youthful the participants and the organizers were, hundreds strong, but also this is a Veterans March. And not only were the demands good and the slogans good, but I didn't see in all those pictures one US flag. Now, usually a Veterans March, you have a lot of confused people. I mean, maybe the flags are upside down and backwards and marked up and ripped, but got some US flags in there. It's like there's been a leap over that. That's worth taking note of too. Okay.
So I'll address the question about Russophobia because I feel like we can extrapolate broader lessons from it. You know, if somebody says like, oh, do you like Putin? Do you support Putin? I usually say yes, I do, because I personally do. You know, he's leading a nation. He's an anti-imperialist that's defending the sovereignty of Russia. Why wouldn't I support him? That's the only basis of that's the only thing I look at when I'm looking at whether I support a leader. But then I follow up with, it actually doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what you think about Putin because we're not Russian. So why the fuck do you care what I think or what I don't care what you think. You shouldn't care what I think. We should care about what the people of Russia think and they support him. That's the end. That's the bottom line. The same can be said for, you know, any nation that is subjected to intense propaganda and demonization, like the DPRK, like Iran, and like Venezuela, right? And I always say, look at the masses, look at the people there. Do they support that person? And the answer is yes, right? Because these leaders are defending the sovereignty and self-determination of those nations. And they refuse to be vassals of the United States and the West. And that honestly as anti-imperialists, that should be our only basis of looking at whether we're supporting a nation or not, to be honest. Um, Comrade Ana Maria, what was your question about the indigenous? Yes. Yeah, well, I think it's really important whenever we talk about indigenous governance, indigenous sovereignty, like I think we always need to go to indigenous peoples to hear it from them, since they're really the ones that are best positioned to speak about their own nations. But, for me, when I think about indigenous governance, I think about, what was life like on Turtle Island and present day North America before the European settlers came. And it was, there was different nations, there was different tribes, but, and yes, there was some conflict, but at the end of the day, there was this understanding of like, we don't all have to be the same person. Like it wasn't this like colonial conquistador mentality that the Europeans exported across the planet, right? It was like, we don't have to completely erase your existence. We just have to learn to live side by side. So, because we all bring different strengths to the table, right? Some nations will provide some things and others will provide others. And there was this, idea of barter and trade and honestly, like what China's trying to do right now, which is peaceful coexistence, what is it called? Mutually beneficial trade. And I honestly think that that's what I think about when I think about indigenous governance. Also, this idea of like resistance as well. The indigenous peoples on North America resisted from day one, since the moment that the settlers came. And that is the learning that I personally take. I take this idea of self-determination, the idea of self-defense, the idea of protecting your land. Land is everything. Like if you don't have land, you don't have nothing, right? It's like the material basis for which you build a society off of. So this idea of protecting your land, defending your people, defending your nation, and those are some of the takeaways that I have from indigenous governance. But again, that's my interpretation of it. I'm not part. I don't identify as indigenous, although I do have indigenous blood in me. But I can't really speak for that community. I think there was also a question earlier about how can you support the struggle to liberate President Maduro and Celia Flores, even if you're not in New York or the East Coast. I think that you can create solidarity actions in your own city or town or wherever you're located, right? So in New York, we've decided to show up on the 3rd of every month. We have a monthly action outside of MDC Brooklyn. We also have the action outside of the courthouse on July 22nd. So July 22nd, create a solidarity action in your city, in your town, where, you do a banner drop. I think right now the big thing is education. Like we need education more than anything. So, distribute flyers, do a teach-in, talk about what Maduro has done for the people of Venezuela. Talk about the fact that Venezuela is losing their sovereignty because Maduro's not there. Let's be real about that. As soon as they kidnapped him, that's when the Zionists started infiltrating Venezuela. And we know what the current situation is. So talk about what was life like for Venezuelans, before Hugo Chavez, before the Bolivarian Revolution, and do the education, because if there is confusion, then there won't be solidarity. And I think like political education is kind of step number one. And that's something that everyone can do no matter where you're located.
That
Yeah.
They could ask government to direct things. They can
Definitely. Yeah, and I'm just passing this because this is Ana Maria's thoughts on how can you build solidarity for Palestine, Cuba, Venezuela, Lebanon on your campus. And what Dr. Flores said is that you should find an administration staff member or professor.
Faculty.
Okay, faculty member, because they have more power. So find a faculty member that shares those politics and will support you in starting an organization on your campus. College students are in like a very, very privileged position because you can use university funds for revolutionary organizing. I wish that I was a revolutionary and conscious like I am now. When I was in college, I would have siphoned so much money from NYU. Fuck NYU. And that's what you should be doing as a college student. How can I take the resources that I have, the free printing that you have access to, print zines, print flyers, post things up in the bulletin boards, use the school chats to spread propaganda. That's what you should be doing to build a movement on your campus.
Okay, comrades, just bear with us. Larry wanted to make a comment, and I think Rabab wanted to make a comment probably about the indigenous question too. Okay, so Larry, you want to? Yeah. So bear with us, comrades.
Pardon me for speaking again. This is just to add to something that Comrade Chase said, and I figured I better do it before, we start getting all sorts of, right, you support Putin, whatever. Another way an additional way of looking at it. Russia's a capitalist country. We're communists. We're not obliged to support the leadership of Russia's domestic policies. And as Jay said, what the Russian people think about this is very important, But that's one category. The Russophobia that Comrade Michael spoke to, that's a layover from anti-communism, frankly. And there's you can't compare it to Black and brown people around the world, but there's an element of racism, of cultural discrimination that's historic. And I'm not saying that it's not complicated, and to the extent it is, maybe we'll have a meeting about it. But but here's the thing, comrades. Here's the thing. Present reality. All theory aside for a second. Right now, Russia is a pillar, along with China playing a bigger role in Iran and several other places in the struggle against U.S. imperialist hegemony. And here's the bottom line. Crushing and weakening, however you want to put it, U.S. imperialist hegemony is central to the world's struggle, not only for liberation, however you define that, but for world socialism. And so you can't get under it, you can't get around it, you can't get above it. That's the role that a country is playing now. And so that contextualizes our view of Russia in the context of the world struggle today. And as you know, all of these questions, it's time to revisit them. And in the party, we promise to give a lot of thought to more forums like this. Not that previous forums weren't great. Of course they were, but in keeping with world changes, to take it to the next level, whatever that means. Also, we want to, we had these wonderful socialist discussion groups, usually here on a Sunday, and starting with, I think, the attack on Venezuela earlier this year, and then Iran, now the threats against Cuba, all of the events, we weren't able, and perhaps other things, we weren't able to continue them. We want to begin them again. And I don't know whether we'll be able to start them this summer, but even if we're not, very soon it will be the fall. And this won't be disconnected from the process. This will be part of, this will be part of continuing and expanding this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Okay, and so I'm giving the last word to Rabab. Okay, Rabab?
Thanks, Monica. Yeah, I wanted to just say that the whole question of sovereignty and indigeneity is very much connected with the whole nature of the sovereign colonial project of the United States. There are definitely treaties between the US as a nation state and different Indian nations. The problem with that is the structure that is put very much favors the United States. Whether you're talking about any treaties, I mean, first of all, many of them have been broken already. The United States law rules, remember, I don't know if any of you remembers about the whole question of adoption, and it also happened with Cuba, by the way. And any question of where the children live of the indigenous nation, who gets registered, who doesn't get registered, all of these issues, all of them, at the end of the day, what rules is the US federal law. And of course, we should also take with a caveat, US federal law, who actually rules in it? Is it really the Supreme Court? Is it really the president in office, Mr. Trump and company and so on, with his lack of knowledge completely and with his dictatorial traits and so on, and everybody is allowing him to do that, not necessarily because they like it, but it also benefits them. So let's put all of these things together: the capitalist, the financial, the military, all of these play in with each other. And somebody mentioned Epstein, that they keep trying to cover up and so on. That's another huge issue. So I think the whole question to think about sovereignty for indigenous people, I liken it to what happens with Palestine, when every time the US comes in and offers something, Israel comes in and offers something. Self-determination and independence is a totally different ball game when it is real and what is guaranteed really, and somebody can not only guarantee but also be there to make sure that the guarantee is held up. So the United States guaranteed the agreement between 1995-96. It's called H1H2, about Hebron, where the Palestinian Authority should control Area A. If you don't know all of these things, please Google them, because we don't have time, all of us, to get into them. Area B, Area C, and so on. They ended up dividing the Ibrahimi Mosque, which is supposed to be under the control of the Muslim Palestinian Waqf authorities. And now, at the end of the day, Palestinians have no option to go into it. The only people who control it are the Israeli military, who control the gates to the Palestinians who go to pray. And I've been subject to that many times. I can explain it to you. And the Israeli soldiers and the settlers who are outside, who are terrorizing Palestinians, right on the walls, very hateful slogans and so on. One time they even lied about us and so on. The UN force supports them. All of this stuff can never, ever be guaranteed unless people get themselves this action and are able to fight for it. This in the whole question of what can you do for indigenous sovereignty when the whole area is controlled by settler colonial project that is supported by colonial projects. That is, I mean, you know, we can even talk about the residential schools. We can talk about the children who are stolen from their families and told to become Canadians, become American, or their languages are destroyed. We can talk about the bones. I mean, I'm doing this project about Palestinians, bones and bodies and so on. But indigenous bones are all taken. They are not even given back, despite many times of calls about it and so on. African nations have a better chance to get the bones and the relics, to get them back, to put them in their own country, which is also still very difficult, despite the so-called independence, than actually an indigenous nations here. And the problem is that people don't even pay attention to it. And it's not that people do not fight for it. American Indian movement has been fighting for it for a very long time. The struggle to release Leonard Peltier has been going on. The problem is settler colonial projects is very vicious, is very nasty, is very structured, has a lot of ways to take about it. And the way that they put it within the whole curriculum and and I'm very familiar with that, because they also put it in ethnic studies, and it shouldn't be in ethnic studies. Indigenous people are supposed to be in the indigenous independent nations that should not be subjected to the US nation state. They're outside of it. So this is something that really requires a lot of discussion, especially now when people are talking about 250 and so on and so forth. This is the time to actually explore this box and talk about it, and talk about what does this really mean. So the next generations do not get the books that are completely erased, everything is erased, and learn about it. And I'm very happy to participate in that discussion. Not happy because the situation is okay, but because people are continue to struggle, and we should be there to support them in that struggle, because this is also part of the worldwide struggle now that there are many nations who are bringing this up. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabab. Okay, I think we're going to end the meeting now.